The air in Harrow's End had shifted, thick with a restless energy that crawled beneath the skin and lodged itself deep in the bones. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting a blood-orange glow over the ragged silhouettes of the cornfields, the village square swelled with anxious voices. Neighbors who once exchanged warm greetings now eyed each other with wary suspicion, their conversations laced with accusation and dread. "It's them," whispered a gaunt woman, clutching her shawl tightly. "I saw Thomas near the edge of the fields last night, talking to no one. What if he's involved?" The murmurs rippled like wildfire. Thomas Grady stood a few paces away, his jaw set, blue eyes scanning the restless crowd. The farmer, known for his pragmatic mind and steady hands, felt the sting of betrayal more keenly than any wound. He knew the villagers' fear was justified, yet it threatened to tear them apart just when unity was their only hope. Sheriff Daniel Crow stepped forward, his stocky frame dominating the discord. "Enough," he barked, his voice carrying the weight of authority but edged with a weariness born from sleepless nights. "This chaos solves nothing. We're enforcing a strict curfew starting tonight. Anyone caught wandering after dark will be detained." A chorus of reluctant agreements and fearful grumbles met his decree. The sheriff's eyes flickered over the crowd, noting the fractures that fear had carved into the once tight-knit community. He glanced toward Thomas, silently imploring him to help restore order. Later, in the dim quiet of the sheriff's office, Crow pinned fresh curfew notices to the battered bulletin board. The scratching of his nails against the wood was the only sound, save for the distant rustling of the fields beyond the windows. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, slipping through cracks and seeping into dreams. Meanwhile, beneath the gnarled limbs of the ancient oak that marked the village center, Thomas sat beside Maggie Ellis. The schoolteacher's auburn hair caught the last glimmers of twilight as her kind eyes scanned the faded pages of the journal she had uncovered. The brittle paper smelled of dust and time, the ink faded but the words potent with forbidden knowledge. "The pact," Maggie murmured, tracing a line of cursive that spoke of sacrifice and blood. "It's real. And it's not just history, it's happening again." Thomas swallowed hard, the weight of his ancestors' sins settling like a stone in his chest. "We have to find a way to stop it," he said, voice low but resolute. "If the crops want blood, they'll get it, but not if we can help it." The cornfields whispered around them as twilight deepened into night, their voices weaving a sinister lullaby that wrapped cold fingers around their resolve. Not far off, Eli Grady stood at the field's edge, breath fogging the chill air. His eyes darted nervously among the stalks, wide with terror as the voices crescendoed around him. The whispers clawed at his mind, promising salvation in exchange for surrender. He shivered, torn between fear and fascination, isolation pressing in like the thick soil beneath his feet. Back in the village, the fractures widened. Neighbors who once trusted each other now exchanged wary glances and curt words. The curfew kept them inside, but it could not contain the growing dread that seeped into every corner of Harrow's End. Thomas and Maggie's alliance became a beacon amid the darkness, their shared determination a fragile thread holding hope together. Yet even as they planned their next move, the whispers grew bolder, demanding a price that chilled their blood. The night deepened, and the village held its breath. Somewhere in the rustling stalks, the harvest spirit waited, patient and hungry, its shadow stretching long over the fractured trust of Harrow's End. And as the moon rose high, the question hung heavy in the air: would unity prevail, or would fear consume them all? The night had come heavy and thick, pressing against the windows of Thomas Grady's modest farmhouse like a living thing. Sleep had been a stranger these past days, and tonight, when his body finally succumbed, his mind betrayed him with vivid nightmares, darker than any he had known. He dreamed of the cornfields, those endless seas of whispering green alive and watching. The stalks rustled in tongues only the cursed could understand, voices both ancient and agonized. Shadows coiled and writhed through the rows, coalescing into a towering figure of shifting darkness, its eyes glowing with a hunger that chilled Thomas to his core. It reached out, tendrils of shadow brushing against his skin, whispering demands in a voice that was the rustle of 1,000 leaves and the silence that follows a scream. Thomas jolted awake, heart pounding, sweat slicking his skin. He sat on the edge of his bed, the images clinging to his mind like a suffocating fog. This was no ordinary fear. It was real as the soil beneath his feet and the creeping dread that had begun to grip Harrow's end. Morning light did little to ease the weight of the night. At the village hall, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The harvest festival preparations that once inspired hope now felt like a fragile mask over an unraveling nightmare. Villagers gathered, their faces drawn and eyes wary, voices low but charged with fear. Sheriff Daniel Crow stood at the front, his usual gruff demeanor shadowed by exhaustion. "We need order," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "But I can't promise we'll find answers tonight." Maggie Ellis stepped forward, her auburn hair catching the weak sunlight filtering through the dusty windows. "We can't ignore what's happening," she implored, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "The whispers, the disappearances, they're connected. I've been studying the old journals. The land demands a price." Skeptics scoffed, their disbelief a fragile shield against the encroaching horror. "Folklore won't save us," one man spat. "We need facts, not ghost stories." The room erupted into heated debate, voices rising and falling in a chaotic rhythm. Thomas listened, caught between his innate skepticism and the mounting evidence clawing at his reason. As dusk settled, the villagers convened at the edge of the cornfields for a ritual born of desperation. Bundles of corn, flickering candles, and tattered trinkets were laid on an improvised altar of stones and earth. Faces were pale, hands trembling, voices barely above whispers as they recited prayers and old incantations passed down through generations. Thomas stood beside Maggie and Sheriff Crow, the three of them bound by a shared urgency. "This has to work," Maggie whispered, her eyes searching the darkening horizon where the stalks swayed unnaturally as if breathing. But the fields answered not with peace, but with fury. As night deepened, the rustling grew violent. Stalks bent and snapped, whipping through the air with unnatural force. The wind carried screams raw, primal, and full of anguish, echoing through the village and shattering the fragile calm. People scattered, desperate to escape the unseen terror. Yet the cornfields seemed to consume those who fled, swallowing them into the earth. Blood seeped into the soil where the missing had vanished, dark and fresh against the pale dirt. Thomas's heart hammered as he witnessed the chaos, the curse's appetite insatiable and growing. In the aftermath, silence fell heavy and oppressive. The village was left shaken, scarred by loss and haunted by the knowledge that their ritual had failed. The harvest spirit had not been appeased. It had been enraged. Thomas clenched his fists, determination hardening within him. The whispers were no longer just voices in the wind. They were a call to action, a summons to face the darkness that had taken root beneath their feet. Whatever the cost, he vowed to uncover the truth and protect Harrow's End from the malevolent force that threatened to consume them all. But as the night stretched on, an unsettling thought crept into his mind. What if the spirit's hunger could never be satisfied, and the cycle of sacrifice was endless? And so, Under the watchful gaze of the whispering corn, the harvest of shadows had truly begun. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Thomas Grady stood at the edge of the oldest cornfield in Harrow's End, the stalks towering above him like a living wall of gold and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of earth and ripening corn, but beneath it was something else, something far older and darker. Faint whispers drifted through the rustling leaves, voices so soft they might have been imagined, yet unmistakably there. They tugged at Thomas's senses, a murmur that promised secrets and dreadful truths. He hesitated, the weight of his ancestors' legacy pressing on his shoulders as the whispers grew into an unbearable urgency. For all his skepticism, the evidence was mounting. Villagers were vanishing, the soil soaked with blood, and the land itself seemed to demand a terrible price. With a deep breath, Thomas stepped forward, the dry stalks crunching underfoot as he ventured deeper into the maze of corn. The twilight shadows lengthened, wrapping the field in an eerie embrace. Every rustle, every breath of wind seemed to carry voices just beyond comprehension. Thomas paused to listen, heart pounding. The whispers spoke of sacrifice, of blood, and of a restless spirit bound to the soil. Memories of Old Man Harrow's warnings and Maggie Ellis's journal flickered through his mind, each piece fitting into a grim puzzle. After what felt like hours wandering, Thomas stumbled into a clearing. The moonlight revealed a stone altar, half swallowed by creeping vines and ancient symbols etched deep into its surface. Dark stains marred the cold rock, fresh blood glistened in the pale light. The air here was heavier, suffused with a malevolent presence that seemed to press against his skin like invisible hands. Thomas's breath hitched as the whispers rose to a crescendo, voices overlapping in a maddening chorus that clawed at his sanity. Shadows coalesced at the edges of his vision, shifting and writhing like living things. He glimpsed vague humanoid shapes emerging from the mist, their forms dissolving just as quickly as they appeared. The harvest spirit was here, its hunger palpable in the chilling breeze. Panic surged through him, adrenaline fueling his flight as he tore back through the cornfield. Behind him, the whispers chased, a relentless tide of ancient hunger and dark promises. Thomas's footsteps pounded against the earth as he raced toward the village, the altar and its grim truth etched into his memory. Reaching the edge of the field, he turned once to see the shadows recede, the voices fading into a low, sinister murmur. The weight of what he had discovered settled over him like a shroud, but beneath the dread burned a fierce resolve. He would uncover the full truth behind the harvest spirit and the cursed land, no matter the cost. Yet even as he made this silent vow, Thomas knew the path ahead would be fraught with terror and sacrifice. The cornfields whispered still, waiting, hungry, and the shadows promised that the darkness was far from over. The night deepened, the village lights twinkling distantly like fragile beacons against the encroaching dark. Thomas stood at the threshold of the haunted fields, caught between the tangible world and the ancient curse that clung to the soil. His journey into the heart of the darkness had only just begun. And somewhere in the depths of the whispering corn, the harvest spirit watched, patient and relentless, waiting for the next move in its deadly game. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint rustle of restless corn stalks as Thomas Grady sat alone at the worn kitchen table of his family farmhouse. The only light came from a flickering oil lamp, its weak glow casting long shadows on the peeling walls. Where a faded portrait of his great-grandfather hung, a stern man with eyes as sharp and unyielding as Thomas's own. He traced the outline of the frame absently, his mind entangled in the weight of the ancestral legacy that had suddenly become all too real. For years, Thomas had dismissed the old stories as nothing more than superstition and folklore, relics of a bygone era clung to by a fading generation. Yet, the events unfolding in Harrow's End were shaking him to his core. The whispers that haunted the cornfields, the vanishings, the terrible sense that the very earth beneath his feet was alive with something ancient and hungry, it was all connected to his family's past, and more specifically, to the pact forged by his ancestors. He opened a battered, leather-bound folder, carefully unfolding brittle letters and yellowed documents that had been passed down through generations. The script was hurried and faded, but the meaning was unmistakable. A covenant made in desperation, a sacrifice demanded in exchange for the land's bounty. Thomas's jaw tightened as he read the chilling details, each word sinking like a stone in his gut. Across the room, the clock ticked steadily, marking the passage of time with a cold, indifferent rhythm. Thomas pressed his palm against the table, trying to steady the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. The burden of legacy was heavier than any harvest he had ever reaped. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his reverie. Maggie Ellis stepped inside, her auburn hair catching the lamp's glow, her expression both concerned and resolute. In her hands, she carried the fragile journal she had discovered buried beneath the floorboards of her grandmother's old house. A tome filled with cryptic passages and faded ink that promised answers. "Thomas," she said quietly, settling into the chair opposite him, "I've been poring over this journal all day. There's more here than I expected: rituals, warnings, even hints at how we might break the curse. But the language is old, and the meaning isn't always clear." He nodded, grateful for her unwavering support. "Anything that helps us understand what we're dealing with is worth the effort. The more I learn about my family's past, the more I realize how deep this goes." Together, they leaned over the fragile pages, the flickering lamp casting eerie shadows as they pieced together the fragments of history and horror. The journal spoke of ancient rites performed beneath the moonlight, sacrifices offered to the land to ensure its fertility, and a spirit bound to the soil by blood and oath. It was a grim tapestry woven from desperation and dread. As the night deepened, the silence was broken by the uneasy arrival of Eli Grady, Thomas's younger brother. His face was pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and frustration. He wore his worn hat low, shadowing his features as he confronted Thomas outside the barn. "You can't keep ignoring it, Thomas," Eli said, voice trembling with emotion. "The whispers aren't just in your head. The land is angry. We have to listen to respect the old ways." Thomas folded his arms, the chill of the night and his brother's conviction pressing against him. "Eli, I want to believe you. But these aren't just old stories anymore. We have to find a way to stop this without giving in to fear." Their words hung heavy between them, a rift growing where brotherly trust once stood firm. Eli's superstitions deepened, a stark contrast to Thomas's rational approach, and the tension threatened to unravel the fragile unity of their family. As dawn approached, Thomas found himself standing at the edge of the cornfields, the golden light spilling over the whispering stalks. The fields stretched endlessly, swaying gently in the morning breeze. The rustling was softer now, almost mournful, as if the land itself mourned the sacrifices it demanded. He closed his eyes, breathing in the earthy scent, feeling the pulse of something ancient beneath the soil. The legacy of his ancestors was not just a burden, it was a call to action, to protect his village, to honor the past, and to face the darkness that awaited him in the shadows of the harvest. But how could he break a cycle written in blood and fear? And what price would he have to pay to save Harrow's End? The answers lay somewhere in that whispered secrets of the cornfields, waiting for Thomas to uncover them before the next harvest claimed more lives. He turned back toward the farmhouse, determination hardening his features. The weight of legacy pressed on him, but Thomas Grady was no stranger to hard labor, and he would fight to the last breath to protect the land and the people he loved. Yet, as he crossed the threshold, a faint whisper curled round the edges of his minder, chilling reminder that some shadows never truly fade. The night air in Harrow's End had grown thick with an oppressive silence, the kind that presses against the skin and seeps into the bones. Thomas Grady stood on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, the pale glow of the crescent moon barely illuminating the endless sea of corn that stretched beyond the horizon. The rustling of the stalks had always been a familiar lullaby for the village, but tonight that lullaby twisted into something far darker. It began as faint whispers, barely audible above the gentle breeze, but as the hours deepened, the whispers grew louder, morphing into incoherent murmurs that seemed to crawl beneath the skin. Then, without warning, the whispers shattered into piercing screams that tore through the night like a blade. Thomas's heart pounded as the screams echoed across the fields, bouncing off the wooden facades of shuttered homes and awakening every soul in Harrow's End. Windows rattled in their frames, dogs howled in terror, and a heavy silence fell between the bursts of screams, each one more desperate than the last. Inside the sheriff's office, Sheriff Daniel Crow slammed his fist onto the rough-hewn desk, the sound sharp enough to startle the deputies gathered around. His weather-beaten face was drawn tight with frustration and fear. "We need more patrols out there," he barked, voice hoarse. "If those screams mean they're taking more folks, we can't just stand around waiting for the worst." His men nodded, the room heavy with tension. Crow's stoic exterior cracked momentarily as he rubbed his temples, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like the thick summer heat. Despite his skepticism about the supernatural rumors that spread like wildfire, the brutal reality of the disappearances was undeniable. Meanwhile, Maggie Ellis hurried through the village lanes, her breath coming in short gasps as she moved from house to house, checking on neighbors and offering what comfort she could. At Sarah Pike's modest farmhouse, Maggie found the woman sitting on the creaking porch steps, her hands trembling, eyes wide and haunted. "Sarah," Maggie said gently, placing a firm hand on her shoulder, "we're going to get through this. We have to." Sarah's voice cracked as she responded, "But who's left to protect us? The fields. They're alive with screams. I don't know what's out there anymore." Maggie swallowed the lump in her throat, the burden of hope heavier than ever. A short distance away, Thomas moved toward the edge of the oldest cornfield. The stalks were taller here, their rustling more frantic and urgent. He paused, the chill of the night seeping through his jacket as he strained to listen. The screams had subsided into a low, eerie chorus of whispers again, but beneath them vibrated a primal menace. His eyes narrowed, blue piercing the darkness, as he whispered to himself, "This can't go on. I have to find out what's really behind this madness." The village was unraveling. Trust was fraying, and fear was a living thing that slithered through every conversation and glance. Sheriff Crow's patrols offered little comfort, their presence a thin shield against the unknown horrors lurking in the fields. As dawn crept over the horizon, the silence that followed the night's terror felt fragile and incomplete. The screams had stopped, but the terror they left in their wake clung stubbornly to the village, a shadow that refused to fade. Thomas knew this was only the beginning. The whispers would return, louder and more demanding. And unless they uncovered the truth soon, the heart of Harrow's End would be lost forever. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The fields whispered still, and he was listening.